The wind carried dust across the long stretch of prairie, a dry whisper that clung to the skin and stung the eyes. Clara pressed a hand against her rounded belly as she trudged along the cracked dirt road, her boots scuffing against stones that seemed sharper with every mile. She had been walking since dawn, though the sun now climbed high enough to burn her shoulders through the thin, faded fabric of her dress. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she didn't dare stop. Stopping meant being found and being. Found meant ruin. Her name was Clara Harper, though she had stopped using her last name weeks ago. In the towns she passed, she was simply that outlaw's widow. It didn't matter that she had never lifted a gun or robbed a soul. Her late husband, Jesse Harper, had stained her name with his sins. Men said Jesse's blood still cried out for vengeance, and Clara, with his child inside her, carried the echo of that curse. The memory of that night Jesse bleeding out in the dust after a gunfight gone wrong still lived sharp in her mind. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, hadn't even looked at her when the bullet struck him. But as he lay gasping, he had pressed a hand weakly to her arm and whispered a name. She didn't understand. Thornton. She hadn't known if it was a plea, a warning, or some half-mad secret he carried to his grave. Since then, the whispers had spread. Jesse Harper's gold was still hidden somewhere, and his widow must know where. Clara didn't, but tried telling. That to the bounty hunters, to the rough men who smelled of whiskey and greed, to the townsfolk who eyed her swollen belly and spat in the dust at her feet. She carried more than her own life now. She carried the promise of a child, innocent of its father's sins, and for that reason alone she kept running. By mid-afternoon, the road seemed endless, stretching into heat waves that shimmered like ghosts ahead. Her throat burned with thirst, her canteen long emptied. She pressed onward, murmuring softly to her belly as though the child inside could hear her. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Just a little farther. Mama won't let them take you." The words were more prayer than promise, for Clara herself wasn't sure how much farther her legs would carry her. The world spun faintly when she lifted her eyes, and the shapes on the horizon blurred. She stumbled, caught herself against a leaning fence post, and bit her lip until the taste of blood jolted her awake again. Behind her, the road lay empty, but emptiness meant nothing. Men could ride fast, faster than she could ever walk. Each rustle of grass made her heart lurch. Once, the distant crack of hooves had sent her diving into a ditch until the riders passed. She had learned to be invisible, to blend with shadows, to vanish before greedy eyes could find her. Yet, despite her fear, a different kind of ache gnawed inside her, a loneliness deeper than hunger. Jesse had left her with nothing but debts and danger. No family, no home, no friend to trust. Just her unborn child and the hope of surviving long enough to bring it safely into the world. She thought of the town she had passed through, Hardwell, where the sheriff had spat tobacco at her feet and told her to move on, outlaw's woman. Dry Creek, where children had thrown stones at her dress. And Ash Hollow, where a storekeeper had refused her bread unless she could pay double, smirking as she clutched her belly in shame. Each town blurred into another reminder no one wanted her. No one believed her innocent dot. As the sun tilted westward, the land around her began to change. Rolling pastures stretched beyond the road, dotted with cattle that moved like brown shadows against the grass. The fences stood straighter here, strong and well kept, unlike the sagging one she had leaned on earlier. Far in the distance, she thought she saw a ranch house, white walls glowing faint against the horizon. Her heart quickened. A ranch meant people, and people meant risk. But it also meant water, maybe food, maybe a chance to rest. She hesitated. At the fork in the road, swaying as her body begged for mercy. The decision made itself when her knees buckled and she dropped to the dirt. She couldn't keep going much longer. She needed help, whether danger came with it or not. She dragged herself to her feet, clutching her belly as though holding the child steady inside her, and turned toward the ranch. Step by step, she moved across the open land until the shape of the house grew clearer, a sturdy building, with a wide porch and tall barns behind it. A windmill turned lazily nearby, the promise of water. Clara's throat tightened with hope. She quickened her pace, though her body screamed with exhaustion. She reached the edge of the ranch yard just as a figure appeared on the porch, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the stance of someone used to command. His hat shaded his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. Her heart leapt in her chest. She wanted to turn and flee, but her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, she stumbled forward, her voice breaking. "Please," she whispered, though the word was barely a breath. The man stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching on gravel. He moved with the easy strength of someone who belonged to the land, every stride steady, unhurried. Clara swayed where she stood, the world tilting again, but before she could collapse, strong hands caught her. For a moment, her fear flared. What if he knew her name? What if he turned her in? But his voice, low and steady, washed over her. "Easy. Now," he said. "You're safe. You're safe here." The words struck her harder than the sun, harder than the road's cruel stones. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself sink into the safety of his arms. But a lifetime with Jesse had taught her that promises often turned hollow. She forced her eyes open, searching his face, trying to read the truth there. All she knew was this: she couldn't run any farther. Whoever this man was, whatever he chose to do with her fate, she was in his hands now. And for the first time in weeks, Clara Harper allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she and her unborn child could rest. The first thing Clara felt when she woke was the softness of a quilt tucked beneath her chin. For a long moment she lay still, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling above her, a ceiling of solid timber beams, polished by time and care, not the cracked plaster of a cheap inn. A faint smell of coffee and wood smoke drifted through the air, warm and steady, the scent of a place lived in, not abandoned. She shifted slightly, and a groan escaped her lips. Her body ached from days on the road, but at least her belly felt supported, cushioned at last. Panic fluttered briefly in her chest as the memories returned, collapsing in the ranch yard. Strong arms catching her, a stranger's steady voice telling her she was safe. Safe. The word felt dangerous to believe. She pushed herself up on her elbows, glancing around the room. It was simple but well kept. A sturdy oak dresser, a rocking chair near the window, clean curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. Someone had placed a glass of water on the knitstand beside her. Her parched throat burned with thirst, and she drank greedily, the coolness easing the fire that had haunted her for days. The creak of a door startled her. Clara froze, clutching the quilt tightly around her shoulders. The man from the porch stepped inside. In the daylight, he was even more imposing, tall, broad-shouldered. His hair dark beneath the brim of his hat, though threads of gray hinted at years of labor and loss. His eyes, steady and unreadable, flicked over her, not with judgment, but with something closer to concern. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and even. "Thought you might sleep another day after the state you were in." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She had learned caution too well. Every word might betray her past. She lowered her gaze instead, fingers twisting in the quilt. Man set a tray on the dresser, a plate of biscuits and a small bowl of stew, steam still curling upward. The sight of food nearly undid her. "Eat," he said simply. "You'll need strength." She hesitated, then whispered, her voice rough. "From silence. Why are you helping me?" He studied her for a moment, then pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, his movements unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. "Name's Jacob Thornton." he said. "This is my ranch. Found you near collapsing on my road. That's reason enough." Clara's heart skipped at the name. Thornton, the name Jesse had whispered with his dying breath. She gripped the quilt tighter, searching Jacob's face for some sign that he knew her, knew Jesse, knew the shadow that clung to her like a curse. But Jacob's expression remained calm, unreadable. "Thank you," she murmured, lowering her eyes again. Jacob leaned back in the chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Don't thank me yet. Folks around here are suspicious of strangers, especially ones who show up half dead on a rancher's land. If you're running from trouble, it'll find you sooner or later. I need to know what kind of trouble that is." Clara's pulse quickened. She wanted to lie, to spin some harmless tale, but lies had a way of unraveling, especially under eyes as sharp as his. She pressed a hand protectively over her belly, then whispered, I just need a place to rest. I won't stay long." Jacob's gaze softened slightly as it flicked to her rounded belly. He didn't press her further, though the silence stretched heavy between them. Finally, he nodded toward the food. "Eat first. Talking can wait." Clara's hunger overcame her hesitation. She reached for the bowl, her hands trembling as she lifted the spoon. The stew was rich and savory, every bite filling the emptiness that had gnawed at her for days. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden, and she blinked them away before Jacob could see. When the bowl was empty and the edge of her hunger dulled, she looked at him again. "I can work," she said softly. "I don't expect charity. I can sew, clean, whatever needs doing. Just don't send me away." Jacob tilted his head, regarding her with a thoughtful frown. "You've got fire in you, I'll give you that, but work's not what you need right now. You're carrying a child, and by the looks of it, you're near your last months. What you need is rest." Clara bristled, unused to anyone telling her what she needed. "I've managed on my own this far," she said. His lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. "Barely." Her cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Jacob rose from the chair, his presence filling the room like a steady oak tree, immovable and sure. "You'll stay here until you're strong enough to move on. That's all there is to it." Clara's heart twisted at his certainty. She should have felt relief, but instead fear coiled tighter inside her. Every kindness came with a price. She had learned that lesson well. But when she looked up into his steady eyes, she saw no greed, no cruelty, only a quiet strength she didn't know how to trust. Before she could answer, a knock rattled the doorframe and a voice called from outside. "Mr. Thornton? Word's going round town about that woman you brought in. Folks are saying she's Jesse Harper's widow." Clara froze, her blood turning cold. Jacob's gaze sharpened, shifting from her face to the door. He didn't open it. Instead, he spoke in a low, firm tone. Let him talk. The words settled heavy in the room, but for the first time, Clara wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had found a man who wouldn't turn her away. The next few days blurred together for Clara, each one stitched with the quiet rhythm of the ranch. Dawn came with the lowing of cattle and the creak of the windmill. Evenings fell in the soft hush of prairie winds through tall grass. Jacob Thornton went about his work with steady diligence, checking fences, speaking with his ranch hands, tending to matters of land and stock. Clara watched from the porch sometimes, wrapped in the quilt he'd given her, feeling like a ghost, hovering on the edge of a life she had no claim to. She kept to herself, sewing a tear in her dress, scrubbing the floor of the guest room, though Jacob had told her she needn't. It was easier to keep her hands busy than to let her thoughts wander. Each time she pressed a palm to her growing belly, fear returned like a shadow, fear that men would come, that whispers would spread, that Jesse's sins would hunt her down even here. It didn't take long for the first signs of that fear to manifest. On the third morning, Jacob saddled his horse to ride into town for supplies. Clara had begged him not to take her. She dreaded the stares, the mutters, the way people's eyes cut her like knives. But by afternoon she heard the crunch of wagon wheels and the murmur of voices drifting from beyond the yard. Curiosity tugged her to the window, and when she peeked out, her breath caught. 2 riders sat mounted at the edge of the ranch yard, rough men, their hats pulled low, pistols heavy on their hips, bounty hunters. Clara's blood ran cold. Jacob met them by the fence. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught fragments carried on the wind. Harper's widow. Word is she's here. Reward if she talks. Her hands trembled as she gripped the window frame. She knew how this would end. Men like that didn't leave without what they wanted. She had seen it too many times, greed carving through mercy like a knife. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob building in her throat. But then Jacob's voice cut through, sharp and steady. She's under my roof, he said. That's all you need to know. One of the men spat into the dust. Then you'd best keep your roof strong, Thornton. Word spreads fast, should bring trouble. Jacob didn't flinch. Trouble knows it'll find a fight here. The men exchanged looks, muttered curses, and finally wheeled their horses, galloping back down the road in a cloud of dust. Clara sagged against the wall, her knees weak. No one had ever stood between her and danger so firmly, not since Jesse had only ever invited danger in. That evening, Jacob returned to the house, dust still clinging to his hat brim. Clara sat by the hearth, her sewing forgotten in her lap. She rose as he entered, her voice unsteady. They'll come back, she whispered. Yes, he said simply, removing his hat and setting it aside. And more with them? Word's already circling in town. Folks think you know where Harper's loot is. Clara shook her head fiercely. I don't, I swear it. Jessie never. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her belly. I just want to keep my baby safe. Jacob studied her in the firelight, his eyes steady, unreadable. Then he said, There's only one way to stop the talk. Clara blinked at him. What do you mean? He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. Names carry weight out here. You carry Harper's name, and men see a target. But if you carried mine... Her breath caught. Yours? My name's worth more than gold in this county, Jacob said. Men won't cross it lightly. If you were my wife, no bounty hunter would dare lay a hand on you. No town gossip would spit at your feet. Clara staggered back a step, her hand tightening on the quilt draped over her shoulders. Your wife? He nodded, calm as if he were. Speaking of mending a fence, it's protection. Nothing more. Her heart thundered. Marriage again? She had sworn never to bind herself to another man, not after Jesse, not after the years of fear and flight. And yet here stood Jacob Thornton, offering her not chains but shelter. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. You don't know what you're asking. That child, it's not yours. Everyone will see. They'll whisper. Jacob's voice softened, but his gaze never wavered. Let them whisper. I don't give a damn what they say. What matters is you and that child walk this earth safe. Her lips trembled. No man had ever spoken of her safety before. Jesse had spoken of escape, of scores, of promises drowned in whiskey. But safety? Never. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Jacob interrupted. Firm but not unkind. I'm offering. You can accept, or you can keep running. But if you choose to run, those men won't stop until you're cornered. And I won't be able to help you then. The fire popped softly in the silence that followed. Clara's heart warred within her fear, gratitude, doubt, hope, all colliding in a storm. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint kick of the child within, as if the baby itself were urging her to choose life, to choose safety. Finally, Her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "If I take your name, do you swear it won't be a chain?" Jacob's jaw tightened, and he nodded once. "A shield, Clara, never a chain." The next day, Jacob Thornton rode into town with Clara at his side. The townsfolk gathered as they passed, whispers swirling like dust devils. At the steps of the church, Jacob dismounted, turned to the crowd, and took Clara's hand. His voice rang clear and steady. "This woman is mine now. She bears my name. Any man who touches her answers to me." The murmur of gossip swelled, but no one stepped forward. Clara stood at his side, trembling, her cheeks burning as dozens of eyes pinned her. She expected scorn, expected laughter. But Jacob's grip on her hand was firm, unyielding, a promise carved into flesh and bone. For the first time since Jesse's death, Clara lifted her chin. She was no longer just an outlaw's widow. She was Clara Thornton, and the world would have to reckon with that. The days after Clara took Jacob's name were like walking on new ground, steady yet strange. In town, people's eyes still followed her, but their stares were wary now, not cruel. The whispers hadn't stopped, but the sharp edges of gossip dulled when Jacob's presence loomed nearby. He was a man the county respected, not for his wealth alone, but for the quiet way he carried his authority. Like a man who knew the land bent to no one's will yet worked with it all the same. Still, safety felt fragile, like thin glass over deep water. Clara sensed it in every hushed conversation, in the way some townsfolk leaned together when they thought she wasn't looking. Even back at the ranch, peace never quite settled in her chest. And then one night, the storm she feared finally broke. It began with the howl of coyotes beyond the pastures, eerie and restless. Clara woke in the dark, her hand instinctively pressing her swollen belly. She thought at first it was just the wild, until she caught another sound, the faint thud of hooves. Too heavy, too deliberate. Jacob was already awake. He slipped from bed, pulling on his boots and reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp in the glow of the lamp he lit briefly before dousing it again. "Stay inside," he told her, voice low but firm. "Don't open that door unless it's me." Fear spiked in her chest. "Jacob, Clara." His tone left no room for argument. He touched her shoulder, a brief, grounding gesture, then slipped out into the night. Clara sat frozen in the dark, every muscle trembling. She heard voices outside, rough, mocking. Then the unmistakable sound of laughter that made her blood run cold. Jesse's gang. She hadn't seen their faces since Jesse's death, but she remembered them too well, the men who had ridden with her husband, who had swaggered into towns leaving wreckage in their wake. She had cooked for them, scrubbed their blood from Jesse's shirts, endured their leering jokes. Now their voices slithered through the walls of Jacob's house. Well, one drawled, "if it ain't Thornton. Heard you picked up something that belonged to our old friend Jesse." "Belongs to me now," Jacob's voice cut back. "Steady as iron. She carries my name." A pause, then mocking laughter. "Name don't change what's in her belly, Thornton. Jesse's blood lives there, and with it, his secrets." "Where'd he stash it, huh? Where's the gold?" Clara pressed both hands to her stomach, her breath ragged. The gold again, always the cursed gold Jesse had muttered about in his drunken nights. She had never known if it truly existed, but the men believed, and that belief was enough to damn her. "Leave this land," Jacob's voice rang out. "You've got no claim here." A gunshot split the night, echoing across the pastures. Clara gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then the gang whooped, firing into the air. "You gonna fight us all, Thornton?" Burning this pretty little ranch would be a fine start. Clara stumbled to her feet, pacing like a caged animal. She couldn't sit and do nothing. Jacob was out there, facing men who had killed for less. Her body screamed for her to hide, but her heart it urged her to act. She found herself at the window, peering out into the moonlight. There they were, 5 riders, shadows shifting in the glow of their torches. Jacob stood in the yard, rifle steady in his grip, his stance unshakable. He looked like a man carved of stone, but Clara knew flesh bled, bone broke. She bit her lip hard, fighting the sob that rose. If the gang set fire to the barns, the cattle, the house, everything would be gone. The baby inside her would be born into ashes. One rider spurred forward, calling out, "Hand her over, Thornton. She knows something, and we'll have it, one way or another." Jacob's answer was a gunshot, sharp, decisive. The rider's hat flew into the dust, and the man jerked his reins, cursing. "You'll get lead if you try," Jacob warned. The standoff stretched, the gang murmuring among themselves. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass, whispering prayers. Finally, the leader laughed low and cruel. "This ain't over. You can't keep her hid forever. She talk, or she burn." With that, the riders wheeled their horses and thundered into the night, torches scattering sparks into the wind. Jacob didn't lower his rifle until the last echo faded. Only then did he turn back toward the house, his shoulders heavy in the moonlight. Clara rushed to the door before he even stepped inside. Her voice broke. "They won't stop, Jacob. They'll come again. They'll kill you for me." He closed the door behind him, bolting it tight, then set the rifle aside. When he turned to her, his face was grave but steady. "Then let him try," he said. "This ranch won't fall. Not while I'm breathin'." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't understand, Jesse. Before he died, he said your name. I don't know why. Maybe he thought you were better than him. Maybe he hated you. I don't know. But they think it means I know something. I don't. I swear I don't." Jacob stepped closer, his hand lifting to gently brush the tears from her cheek. His touch was rough from years of work, but careful, almost reverent. "Doesn't matter," he said. "They'll come whether you know or not. But you're not alone anymore, Clara. They'll have to go through me to reach you." Her breath hitched. No man had ever spoken for her like that, not Jesse, not anyone. For the first time, she let herself lean into Jacob's strength, her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. Outside, the prairie lay quiet again. But Clara knew it was the silence of a storm gathering strength. Gang would return, and when they did, fire would follow. The night was darker than usual, though the stars above stretched endless and cold like pinpricks in a black velvet sky. The land around the wealthy rancher's estate lay still, but inside the house, flickering lamplight painted restless shadows across the walls. Clara sat near the fire, hands trembling on her swollen belly, the weight of her unborn child pressing both her body and her heart. She had not known peace since the day her husband had been gunned down. Her outlaw's widowhood was a curse she carried, one that clung to her like desert dust. People whispered her name in contempt, spat it like a venom. And though she hadn't chosen his crimes, she bore the punishment all the same. Her flight across barren lands, the endless fear of bounty hunters and lawmen, had left her weary. But here she was, sheltered in the home of a man whose wealth could have bought him freedom from the troubles of others. And yet he had invited her in. James Callahan, the rancher, stood by the window, his tall frame outlined by moonlight. His gaze was steady, though Clara had learned enough of men to know that steadiness often masked storms beneath. He had offered her his name not out of passion, not out of pity, but out of something else she couldn't yet define. "You don't know what you're a skin of yourself," Clara whispered finally, her voice breaking the silence between them. "I'm a burden to any man, a widow to a thief, heavy with his child, and hunted." James turned, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in determination. "What I know, Clara, is this out here. A name is more than a brand on cattle. It's a shield, and mine's strong enough to protect you. Protect that child, too." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. How could she explain the shame, the fear that if she accepted his offer, she would only ruin him too? Why? She managed instead, her voice thin. James crossed the room slowly, his boots steady on the wooden floor. "Because I've seen too many women swallowed by this land. Good women, strong women, and I won't watch it happen again." Clara shook her head. "You don't know me. You don't know the darkness following me." "I don't need to," James said, stopping before her. His hand hovered, then gently rested on the back of the chair she sat in. "I just know you've been running too long, and sometimes a woman needs to stop running." Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself lean into his strength. But every part of her life had taught her that men's promises broke easier than dry twigs. The fire crackled, filling the silence again. Outside, the night coyote howled, a sound that made her clutch her belly instinctively. James noticed his gaze softening. "Let me be plain," he said at last. "Marry me, Clara. Take my name. It won't erase the past, but it'll give you a future. You and that child." The words hung heavy in the air. Marriage, his name, protection. It all sounded like salvation. But salvation was something she'd stopped believing in a long time ago. Her breath came uneven as she rose from her chair, clutching the edge for balance. She walked toward the window where the moon bathed the land in silver. Her reflection stared back at her tired eyes, hollow cheeks, the faint swell of life. Within her belly, could she really take this step? Could she let herself become the wife of a man she barely knew? And yet, hadn't he already shown her more kindness than her outlaw husband ever had? She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, whispering, "If I take your name, the world won't see me, they'll see you, and when they come, it'll be you they'll tear apart." Behind her, James's voice was low but firm. "Then let 'em come. I've fought harder men than any outlaw who might chase you. You think I don't know what danger looks like, Clara? I was born in it, raised in it, built my ranch on it, and I'll be damned if I let fear decide for me now." Tears burned her eyes. No man had ever spoken for her like this. Not even her late husband, who had only ever spoken of himself, his schemes, his crimes. She turned, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can believe in promises anymore." James stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then don't believe in promises, believe in actions. I'm standing right here, Clara, and I ain't going anywhere." The words cracked something inside her, something that had been hardened by years of betrayal, fear, and loss. She sank back into the chair, sobs shaking her body. James knelt before her, his hand hovering again before gently resting over hers. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the fire's quiet dance filled the silence. At last, Clara whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Your name might be the only thing that saves me." James nodded once, resolute. "Then it's yours." The decision wasn't sealed with a kiss, nor even with a touch beyond the joined hands. It was sealed in the silence, in the raw truth of two souls, broken in different ways, daring to build something fragile together. But outside, in the shadows beyond the ranch's borders, riders stirred. Men who had tracked Clara's trail, men who knew the widow of an outlaw carried not only shame but secrets worth killing for. And though she did not yet know it, Clara's choice to accept James's name would draw more than whispers. It would draw war. The fire crackled. The child inside her stirred. The rancher's hand stayed steady over hers, and the night deepened, heavy with fate. The last light of the evening stretched long across the plains, painting the world in gold and shadow. The vast sky-deep indigo at the edges, glowing fire where the sun sank, seemed to hold its breath as though it knew some reckoning had.
Arrived at last.
The widow, heavy with child, sat on the wide porch of the wealthy rancher's home, her hands resting protectively over her belly, her mind a storm of fear and fragile hope. For months she had fled, haunted by her outlaw husbands, passed and pursued by men who would never forgive his debts. But now, at this house of stone and timber, with lanterns flickering warmly inside, she felt for the first time in years the possibility of peace. Yet peace never came cheaply. The rancher had given her safety. He had given her food, a bed, a fire in the hearth, and most of all, something she had not known since her youth, dignity. But it was not merely his kindness that unsettled her, it was his offer, his name, his vow that if she became his wife, no man in the territory would dare raise a hand against her or her unborn child. Still, could she take it? Could she, a widow of a branded outlaw, bind herself to a man of honor and wealth? The weight of her past pressed on her, whispering doubts. She remembered the day the lawmen dragged her husband's lifeless body into town, remembered the jeers of townsfolk who called her cursed, tainted by his sins. Would she stain this rancher's name too? Inside the house, the rancher stood by the great stone fireplace, turning his hat slowly in his hands. He was not a man of many words, but his silence carried weight, like the steady rhythm of a drumbeat before battle. He watched her through the window, his expression unreadable, part determination, part something softer he rarely let others see. For weeks he had fought alongside her, protected her from those who would have seen her broken, and in that time something inside him had changed. He had not planned to care for her. Yet he did. The night deepened, and with it came danger. Riders approached in the dark, their torches flickering like devil's eyes against the horizon. Dust rose behind them, and the widow's heart sank. She knew those men, her husband's old gang, wolves without a leader, looking to settle old scores. She staggered to her feet, panic rising. The rancher stepped onto the porch, calm but firm, his hand brushing against the iron at his hip. His voice was low but carried strength. "They've come to finish what he started," he said, eyes never leaving the riders. Her hand clutched at his arm. "They won't stop. Not until I'm gone or dead." He looked at her then, really looked, and something unshakable passed between them. "Not while I breathe." The gang drew up before the ranch, their leader, shouting threats into the night, words dripping with venom and laughter. They demanded the widow. They claimed her unborn child belonged to their fallen brother. The rancher stepped forward into the torchlight, tall and broad, his voice steady. "As stone?" "She's mine," he said. "She bears my name now." It wasn't yet true. Not by law, not by preacher, not by paper. But in that moment, under the weight of his vow, it became truth enough. A silence followed, heavy as the desert heat before a storm. The gang shifted uneasily. The rancher's reputation was iron. He was a man with land, with men loyal to him, with justice on his side. To touch her now meant war they could not win. The leader spat in the dust, cursed, and with a signal, the riders turned back into the dark. Their torches dwindled to nothing against the horizon. The widow's knees nearly buckled with relief. Tears she had held back for too long spilled freely, and before she could stop herself, she leaned into the rancher's chest. For a moment, she was not the widow of an outlaw, not the hunted woman of whispers and fear. She was simply a woman who had found shelter. The rancher held her steady, his hand resting gently over hers where it lay against her belly. His voice, softer now, carried the weight of a promise. "You're safe now. You and the child. As long as I'm here, you'll never have to run again." She lifted her gaze to his, And in the quiet night, with the stars wheeling endlessly above, something shifted inside her. For months she had fled from her past. Now, for the first time, she could see a future. Weeks later, in the small chapel, on the edge of town, the widow stood beside the rancher. She wore a simple dress, her belly round with life, her face glowing with a peace she had almost forgotten she could feel. The townsfolk whispered, still some in doubt, some in pity, some in admiration, but none dared question the man at her side. When the preacher asked if he would take her as his wife, the rancher's voice rang strong and clear, "I will." "When?" The preacher turned to her. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. "I will," she whispered, and so it was done. The name she took was more than a shield. It was hope. It was love, quiet and steady as the earth beneath their boots. It was a promise that the child she carried would grow not in the shadow of an outlaw's sins, but in the light of a man's honor. As the church bells rang, the rancher placed his arm around her shoulders, guiding her out into the sunlight. The town, the plains, the endless sky all seemed different now. For though her past could never be erased, her future had been rewritten. She was no longer the outlaw's widow hunted, and alone she was the rancher's wife, and with his name she had found her life again.